The sermon title is So Now What? And I wrote this just after or just before New Year's. And I was thinking more of New Year's resolutions. We all make New Year resolutions, right? My last year's New Year's resolution was not to make a New Year's resolution, which I held that one up. It's probably the only one I've held up in the last 20 years, is that I didn't make a New Year's resolution and I didn't have to fail. But we all do it. And I can remember one here, and God love her, this is way before Elizabeth. So go ahead and show that first slide. This was the Supreme 90-day workout. It was the Supreme 90-day because it was $29.99, and it wasn't $90 like the P90X. I was too cheap to buy the real thing. So I bought the fake. And you get through, I would make it through 1, maybe 2 weeks, and then it'd start to fall off a little bit, especially when they started doing legs for the third day in a row. And I would never get through the whole thing. And it's like that. I was just, and every year, this was posted in our laundry room. So every time you went to go do laundry, there this was staring at your face to do it. But it wasn't the only thing in our house, and this is our old house, that kind of fell to the way. So I go ahead with 2. That was the bench press. I used it so much I put it in a closet. And then there was and when Elizabeth moved in after we got married, she had a treadmill. And go ahead and show that one. Yep, that was holding the Christmas gifts, right there. And I tell you, we that's about as much use we get now. In fairness, we don't use it now because we need to replace the tread. So that's our excuse as of right now, is we need to buy another tread because it has got to the point where it's gone off to one side. Have you ever done that and then try to run on half of it? It just doesn't work. So we make these resolutions to try. Why do we do it? We try it because we want to better ourselves. Am I right? We want to feel better we want to be a new person. We want to, feel accomplishment. And I would dare say that we do this in our Christian walk. You remember when we were new Christians, we were going to conquer the world, weren't we? Nothing was too big. And then stuff gets in the way. And the first couple of passages I pulled out are from Romans, and I like Romans. I like Paul in specific, because Paul has a lot of deep thoughts. He has a lot of deep thinking. And I tend to like to think beyond. I want to look beyond the first level. I want to look at the second level. And I want to look at the third level. Well, he does that. Now, the thing with Paul is he was probably one of the most convicted Christians in his faith probably we've ever seen. But he also convicted more and persecuted more Christians than anybody else in the world has ever done to this point as a single person. Before he became Paul, before he had that encounter with Jesus, he had killed more Christians by himself than anybody else in the world, and that's to this day. He killed thousands and thousands and persecuted thousands and thousands. So to see somebody to go from such a big conviction on one end and have that life-changing experience that he was so convicted on the other end, and so persuasive in his writings. So he writes in Romans 6:4. He writes, "We are therefore buried with him through baptism into the death, in order that, just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of God, we too may live a new life." That's what happens when we become Christians. The old person, that old self, dies, literally dies. Christ took those sins, took that old person, and took it to the grave, and then came back. And because he did that, we no longer are slaves to that old person. And that, at the beginning of our journey, is all we think about, is all that we have. And somewhere along the way, we start to get off that rail, that first love, if anybody was here for Wednesday night when we talked about the first church in Ephesus. That was our first love. When you became a Christian, that love for Christ was pure. And then somewhere along the way, P90X or the bench press or the treadmill get in the way. We start to get derailed. And it can be anything as easy as trying to get out of bed to things that are life-changing in our world. Paul often talked about a thorn in his side. And we're not too sure if that was physically a thorn or mentally a thorn. But he was in constant torment. And I believe it was a lot to do with the fact that the devil tried to always remind him of who he was. And don't we always go through that? Don't we always, when the devil really wants to get to you, he's going to remind you of what you're not. Or he's going to remind you what you were. And he's going to always tell you you're not good enough. And that's what he did to Paul. He constantly reminded him. And Paul writes about it. He wrote in Romans, this next slide, 7, 23 and 24, he writes, "But I see another law work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner to the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death?" This is him being reminded. This is after he became a Christian. This is after he had written the Romans, and if everybody's heard the Romans Road to Christianity, you take certain passages and it spells out how to become a Christian. He was still, after all this time, he was still tormented by his old self because the devil wanted to remind him of who he was. And he also wanted to remind him what he said he'd never be. We do that so often. And you remember maybe a month ago or whenever it was, I had that line for sanctification. The first thing that the devil wants is you not to get on that road at all. He'd just rather you be oblivious. He is delighted when people say there is no God. He absolutely delights in that because he knows that you're not even looking for that path. But when people get on the path, the next thing, best thing for him is for you guys never to go anywhere on it, just to stand on it. Because if you're not moving forward, it benefits him too. If you're not going forward, you are going backwards. That's what I wrote in 2017, and it still holds true today. If you're not going forward, you're going backwards. Just as my intentions to work out have collapsed, it is now harder to motivate myself to resume. If you think about when you guys are exercising and you get in a good regiment, how many people have ran the mini? Oh, good Lord. One? One. I ran the mini in 1998 maybe? 1998, 1999. That's the last time I ran, ever. That's how bad that hurt. I hurt so bad afterwards, I never ran again. Unless you count basketball or softball. That's the only time I've ran. But that's the case here. Once you stop, it's almost twice as hard to get started again. And those are all plays of the devil. The devil wants us not to get started. And when we do, he doesn't want us to resume. The last thing he wants us to do is to find our way home. We look at Peter. Peter was called the Rock. He was called the Rock because of why? Because he was the first one to claim what Christ was to Christ. And he said, because of this, I will build my foundation, my church on you. But even Peter couldn't hold his faith. And he did it when Jesus was in plain sight. It says in Matthew 26, 69, 70, now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You also are with Jesus of Galilee, she said, but he denied it before them all. I do not know what you're talking about. Now, this is one of Jesus' close friends. This is one that proclaimed that he would die with Christ on the cross. And yet at that moment, he was convinced by the devil to save his own skin because he thought he was going to be persecuted. So just like the sermon, where am I going with this? I don't know. Let's read on. What are your intentions this year, or what are your intentions from here on with your faith? How can you see your intentions in your faith? How can you see your intentions of your faith? It's a question we got to answer, and it's a question we have to ask, because if we're not asking the question, we're not taking an inventory of where we stand as Christians. We always have to evaluate where we are and what we're doing so we can move forward. Because if you don't know where you are, you can't go forward. If you don't know which way to step, you can't go forward. James chapter 2, 14 through 20 reads as this. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone proclaims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you say to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is not accomplished by actions, is dead. Faith by itself is not accompanied by action, is dead. So this passage talks about putting your actions and your faith together, and taking those steps. Matching what you do and what you say together. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You will believe that you believe there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. So he's tying the two together here. You can't act just for the sake of acting. It does you no good. So you can't walk through the church every Sunday and then claim, I'm a Christian. You can't profess that I know Christ or I know God, because even the devil knows Christ and he knows God. It's the pairing of the two together, putting your faith and your works together. I can say I have faith, and then I can go out and show you I'm not. Or I can show you I have deeds, but I have the wrong intentions. Namely, those intentions. So you have to pair them together. And the last verse, because I didn't read the turn page, or page turn. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Here's the gist of all this. There's a warning, and I don't want to delve into this too far, because Jeff is going to talk about this either on Wednesday or Sunday night or both. But there's a church in Revelations that we're going to talk about. It's the last church we'll talk about. It's Laodicea, however you want to say it. And if you were here Wednesday, we started talking about the first church, which was Ephesus. And we talked about he had some things. He said, you do this well, but I have this against you. He does that for every church, save 2 churches. There's 2 churches he doesn't follow that. I like this, you do this well, but this I have against you. There are 2 churches he does not follow that formula. One is the Church of Philadelphia. The Church of Philadelphia he holds nothing against because they are the right church. Their mindset is correct. The second church, he finds nothing good in at all. And that's the warning we have when we as Christians stand still, when we don't exercise our Christianity, when we don't move our feet towards the prize. So I'll read this, and like I said, I don't want to get too far into this because I'm sure he's going to break this way down into what it is. But just listen what this warning says. It's to the angel of the church of Laodicea. He writes, "These are the words of the Amen, the faithful, true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds, that you are neither hot or you're neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth and do not need things. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear, so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so you can see. Those who I love, I rebuke and discipline." So just remember that. If you feel like you're being disciplined by the Father, it's because he loves you. And we can get on the whole, I don't know if I want to get into that because my dad's here. I can tell you, they disciplined us a lot. And they needed to, too. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come and eat with that person, and they with me. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Revelations is full of very applicable, very good things that apply to us now, just as much as they did then, because that's where we are. This is where we are as the time goes. We are just waiting. There's nothing left to fulfill. There's nothing left that has to happen before this happens again. So we're kind of right there at the cusps of it, waiting. It's on the back. Okay. Does anybody know who Horatio Spafford is? No one caught up on their 18th century hymn writers or 19th century hymn writers? I'm going to tell you who he is, because this is an example of the type of Christian I want to be. And this is written, if I remember right, it was written on. This is an account from one of his daughters. Horatio G. Spafford was a successful lawyer and businessman in Chicago with a lovely family, a wife, Anna, and 5 children. However, they were not strangers to tears and tragedy. Their young son died of pneumonia in 1871, and in that year, much of their business was lost in the Great Chicago Fire. That stupid cow knocking over the thing. Yet God, in his mercy and kindness, allowed the business to flourish once more. On November 21st, 1873, the French ocean liner Ville du Havre was crossing the Atlantic from the U.S. to Europe with 313 passengers on board. Among the passengers was Mrs. Spatford and their 4 daughters. Although Mr. Spatford had planned to go with the family, he found it necessary to stay in Chicago to help solve an unexpected business problem. He told his wife that he would join her and the children in Europe in a few days. His plan was to take another ship. About 4 days into the crossing of the Atlantic, the Villa de Harve collided with a powerful iron-hulled Scottish ship, the Loch Earn. Suddenly, all of those on board were in grave danger. Anna hurriedly brought her 4 children to the deck. She knelt there with Annie, Margaret Lee, Bessie, and Tanetta, and prayed that God would spare them if they could be His will, if that be His will, or make them willing to endure whatever that awaited them. Within approximately 12 minutes, the Villa de Harve slipped beneath the dark waters in the Atlantic, carrying with them 226 passengers, including the 4 Spatford children. A sailor rowing a small boat over the spot where the ship went down spotted a woman floating on a piece of wreckage, and Anna still alive. He pulled her into the boat, and they were picked up by another large vessel. 9 days later, landed in Cardiff, Wales. From there, she wired her husband a message that began, "Saved alone, what shall I do?" Mr. Spatford later framed that telegraph and placed it in his office. Another of the ship's survivors, Pastor Weiss, later recalled Anna saying, "God gave me daughters. Now they have been taken from me. Someday I will understand." Mr. Spatford booked passage on the next available ship and left to join his grieving wife. With the ship about 4 days out, the captain called Spatford to his cabin and told him they were over the place where his children had went down. And according to Bertha Spatford Vester, a daughter born after the tragedy, Spatford wrote, "It is well with my soul," while on this journey. And it starts like this: "With peace like a river attendant my way, when sorrow like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." You think you have it hard, and then you read something like that, and you think, oh my gosh, I've never gone through anything like that at all. And yet he didn't lash out at God, but he wrote him one of the most well-known hymns that we still have today.